Hey, me again. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, scholars, members of a Bay, and audience. Good evening, everyone who is attending this lecture, these remote chats I've been organizing together with my researchers. We have been here regularly every week to discuss themes related to Irish studies, to related to Ireland. Last week we had a historian, the historian and former professor of UCC, Dr. Dermot Keogh. He talked about the book he's going to publish soon. It is the Irish in Argentina, and I believe he'll be launching next year. We are very happy because we have counted on a large audience from everywhere: Ireland, England, France, Argentina, and different places in Brazil. Thank you all for coming and joining us, particularly this afternoon. Today, we are back to focus on film studies. So we are delighted and immensely proud to announce another special guest, the talented and experienced critic on Irish films, documentaries, and plays, Ruth BARTON. I am especially honored with her presence among us today. The first time I met Ruth, I'm not sure if she remembers, it was in 2009 when Lancy Pettit, my former postdoctoral supervisor, invited me to go to Dublin for the event you were organizing at
That's
that
right.
time.
Spreading the Irish in
That,
Britain. Yeah.
yes, at Trinity College, Dublin. You organized.
That's right.
Mhm. And the second time was last year, wasn't it?
Is it even, I think it's longer ago, no earlier than that. I think it's
2018.
yeah, 17.
Yes.
I think it's 3 years since I was in Brazil.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, welcome to our virtual Bahia, Ruth.
Thank
And
you.
I'm going to tell the audience who you are. So, Ruth Barton is Associate Professor in Film Studies at Trinity College Dublin. She has published widely on Irish cinema, and her works include Irish National Cinema, 2004, Acting Irish Hollywood, 2006. Where is it? This is, I have this one. And she's a regular film critic on RTA Radio's Arena. Her latest book, yes, can you show Lara her latest book? Is Irish Cinema in the 21st Century. As today in Brazil is a Teacher's Day, we wish to express the love and gratitude we feel towards those who have taught us in life, from school teachers to college professors to our tutors or trainers in fields other than academics. Toward our guest, who is also a professor, I wish to pay tribute to those educators who are facing an entire new set of challenges caused by coronavirus pandemic, struggling to handle their jobs and help their students with new models of teaching. For all of you, lots of happiness, strength, hope, and faith to face this crisis and consequences. Now, I leave the floor for our guest speaker, and after her talk, we have a few questions our student me are going to make her.
Okay.
Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. You had a couple of questions yourself. Did you want to start off with them?
Yes, I can say my questions. Can you tell us your first experiences as a critic of Irish cinema? how did you start your career in film studies? Can you
Well,
tell me okay, answer.
Well, I answer that. Okay, yeah. So, well, yeah, I came to academia quite late. I didn't start off as an academic. I did other things, other jobs, and took a night class in film when I lived in London. And eventually, when my children were small and I needed something to do, I did my master's, I did my PhD, I did my postdoc, and eventually wound up with a job. So I didn't. Yeah, for a long time, I wasn't a lecturer at all. I worked in film. But then when you're living in Ireland, really the easiest thing is to do Irish cinema because you don't have to travel for your research. It's all happening on your doorstep. So yeah, I find that makes it easy for me.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell the audience the similarities and differences among the books you have written so far?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I started off and I had a question. We have a question from Fernando Jr. here who was asking about Jim Sheridan. Hi, Fernando. That was my first book. And in fact, I was asked to write it. And I had just finished my PhD, so I was fantastically excited to be able to be invited to write a book. And I also ended up with interviewing Jim Sheridan while I was writing it, and I include the interview at the end. So a lot of it was taken out of my freshly written PhD. But the funny thing is, nobody else has ever written a book on Jim Sheridan, so it remains the only book on Jim Sheridan. And in fact, his career wasn't. He was going to make In America, which was a great film, but other than that, the films haven't been as successful anyway. And then so the other books. Sorry, Noelle, to complete that. The other books are. I've been kind of, on the one hand, writing about Indigenous Irish cinema, but on the other hand, writing about diasporic Irish cinema. So that's why you get the book you had in your hand, Acting Irish in Hollywood, and also Screening Irish America, which is an edited collection. And so Irish National Cinema, and then the book that I recently wrote, Irish Cinema in the 21st Century, are a mixture of contemporary Irish cinema and the earlier book with more history in it. But then I also took just a ferocious detour and wrote a book that had nothing to do with Irish cinema. I wrote a biography of Hedy Lamarr, the film star Hedy Lamarr. And so that's been far and away my best-selling book ever.
Okay, thank you. So what about the next one? Can you tell the audience? No, you are a professor of film studies at Trinity College, Dublin. How do you organize the syllabus of your course in terms of theory and practice?
Yeah, that's always been a difficult one for us because we are a university, but our students want to make films. So we have probably about 1/3 of our whole program is filmmaking, and 2/3 is film history and practice. And we also, at master's level, we teach. We have a master's in screenwriting, which is very popular, including writing for games. So we always say that the students can't. It isn't one or the other. That you can't be a good filmmaker unless you are well versed in film history and film theory, and you can't really write about films unless you understand how they're made. So that's the idea between our syllabus at Trinity, which is to link the two together.
But when you say history of the cinema, or okay.
Yeah, we teach. Don't forget, you see, we're organised differently to you. So our students only do 2 subjects, or maximum 3. So they'll do, say, film and French, or film and English, or film and history, or they just do film. They can take 1/3 subject if they want to, but they don't have to. So they have very, very focused 4 years of very focused study in film. So we start at the beginning with early and silent Hollywood, and then it goes right up through, to contemporary filmmaking, and we go around the globe. We have a module on Latin American cinema. So by the time they finished with us, they've seen a huge amount of films, but they're also making films as well.
But do you work with adaptation for the plays, adaptation of plays to the cinema?
Not very much.
No?
Yeah, and it's not something that we do very much. We are going to, with the new screenwriting masters, we will be doing some work on adaptation, but it's not something that we actually teach. I think the Department of English may.
Okay. I think it's enough. Because
Yeah, I'll give you a little talk. I'll give you a little talk about my work, so you can all sit back.
I believe you're going to, if you do not include my questions that I have here, I think you.
I'll do my best to include everything that I've been asked, and
right.
I have the questions to my right-hand side here. So I'm going to share my screen now and just pop up the PowerPoint, okay? And we'll see how we're doing. Okay, can you see that? Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah, okay. Very good. So here I'm just going to go through, and this will answer some of the questions that people have been asking too. I'm going to go through just some of the sort of recent material on Irish cinema and try to answer some of your questions at the same time. Okay. So first of all, if you've been studying Irish film, you'll know that older Irish cinema was really about issues. Most of the films were set in the countryside, and right through the era of the Troubles, which is from the late 1960s through to the late 1990s, a lot of the films were about questioning nationalism. So what did nationalism mean, and what was the relationship between Irish identity and violence? So then you get moving through to the end of the late 1990s, the beginnings of the peace process, and people became less concerned with questioning nationalism and more concerned at looking at current issues in Irish society, so the present rather than the past so much. And at the same time, you get the introduction, obviously around about then, of digital video, which opened up filmmaking to people who had not really had access to it before, and also allowed for the Irish Film Board, as it was, Screen Ireland as it is now, to include to make more films, to fund more films because they cost less. So so here we get then some of your questions are, for instance, from Stanio. It can be difficult to define a national cinema, especially in a cosmopolitan country like Ireland. What are the main features they exist of an Irish film? And this is actually probably the most difficult question to answer even now, because if we had some idea of what an Irish film was before, now it's really very difficult to tell because we have this new funding landscape, and as I've put it here, co-productions and transnationalism. So basically, now it's very hard to make a film that has any budget at all without it being a co-production. And I think, again, Noelia, you were asking about this idea of the Euro pudding. Yes. Yeah, the Euro pudding, which was this, when people said, oh, well, if you had a co-production, the original idea got so diluted through the co-production that it just became a mess. But at the same time, now I think most people understand that you have to have this. You can't make films without it. So, for instance, I've just put in here, is The Lobster an Irish film? And this is why it's so difficult to say, what is an Irish film? Really, really hard to answer that question. But I think the important thing to remember about transnationalism is that it's potentially a partnership of equals. So a good film producer in Ireland will be able to put together funding from a number of different countries and still make the original film that they wanted to make. So it isn't necessarily a dilution, but it is a device that without which we couldn't survive. So taking that question even further then, what is an Irish film? Incredibly difficult to answer. Here we have John Michael McDonagh, the director of Calvary, which some of you might have seen, saying, I'm not a big fan of Irish movies. I don't find them to be technically that accomplished. I don't find them that intelligent. So I'm trying to get away from the description of the movie, that's Calvary, as an Irish film. It's not an Irish film. It's just set in Ireland with lots of Irish characters. So when you're making a film there, you're trying to convince the Irish audience, no, it's not like all those terrible Irish movies you've seen before. So obviously people weren't too impressed by that comment. At the same time, Brendan Gleeson, I won't read it all out, was saying, this is a really Irish film. This is a film all about Ireland today. This is a film about the crash of the Celtic Tiger, the financial crash, and this is about being disillusioned with authority figures. So here you have two people. And the question is Calvary an Irish film? It's set in Ireland. It's cast with Irish actors. The dialogue is laced with very strong Irish idioms. It's a black comedy, which a lot of Irish material is, and it has a very topical Irish theme of clerical sexual abuse. So for those reasons, I'm calling it an Irish film. But I think that, as you're saying, it's very, very hard to actually say what an Irish film is any longer. So you just have to kind of hope that the film speaks to people, particularly in Ireland. So again, we were talking about genre filmmaking, and we have a question here again from Sanyo about a genre film and about the horror film. I think you've got an interest in the horror film. So you're saying Ireland still does not have a horror cinema tradition. However, recently, Irish horror films such as The Hole in the Ground have been praised by the critics. How would you describe the contemporary Irish horror film? So one of the things that has happened in this century is that we are making many more genre films. And again, people for a long time used to be very dismissive of genre filmmaking as being too populist, that it didn't have a place in the national cinema because it wasn't political. And certainly, genre cinema can hide its political themes, but you can still look at it and say, well, actually, it is commenting on society, but just not in the very kind of overt way of, say, avant-garde cinema. So there are Irish horror films. Here they are. And there's loads of them. There's loads and loads and loads of contemporary Irish horror films. And actually, just to answer again your question about being in the facing urban issues in the countryside. A lot of these films are actually set in the countryside. So Wakewood, Isolation is, and many of them are trying to de-romanticize the Irish countryside. So where you would have, the quiet man with all its beautiful green scenery and so on, these films, they try to burst that bubble and say, no, the Irish countryside is just as problematic a place to be. And again, to go back to Sania's questions here, you end up with, to mention a few films, Dark Lies the Island, Calm with Horses, and The Young Offenders. And you're absolutely right. These are all films that are set. They could have been set in the city, but they are set in rural Ireland. Well, the Young Offenders moves between the two. They do locate violence within the Irish rural landscape. But then I think, to go back to Jim Sheridan, he did with The Field as well. So it is part, I think, of a de-romanticising that continues. The desire to say the Irish countryside isn't just a tourist location, but real people live there too. So the other thing is, though, that many of those horror filmmakers in particular want to appeal to a global market. And so they don't want their film to look too Irish. And this goes back again to what McDonough was saying about Calvary. So here's a quote from Ivan Kavanagh, who made The Canal. And if you've been following Irish horror movies, you'll probably have seen this one. He says, I wanted an international cast as I didn't want the film to be grounded in any one country to keep the dream construct attached. If it's set in Ireland, it's not an island people would be accustomed to. It would be in London. So again, you have to think about this kind of notion of transnationalism, that filmmakers don't want to be too rooted in one culture because they want other cultures to be able to see their films and to get them. So these are continuing issues, and other genres. There's a lot of Irish genre filmmaking. Once, hugely successful, primarily musical. Loads of gangster films, and then history films. And some of you may have seen Black 47, which could be described as a history film, but could also be described as a very brutal Western. And so these genres, like much contemporary genre filmmaking, are also that their boundaries are quite fluid. So do you think Irish filmmakers were less inclined to produce horror films due to lack of financial resources? That's Sonia again. Actually, I think you can make horror films so cheaply now, certainly, that's perhaps less. I think it was more the question that Irish filmmakers, perhaps before digital, couldn't. It was more difficult to make films. But now with digital, they can make cheap horror films very quickly and easily. But then the other huge success in Irish cinema is animation. And so on the one hand, you have the fact that, as I put in this, 90% of turnover in Irish animation companies is attributed to exports. So most people working in animation in Ireland are making television cartoons for global audiences. But you have some huge local successes. So The Secret of Kells was huge. Give Up Your Old Sins. These are in this list here. I have all the films Song of the Sea that were nominated for Academy Awards. Granny O'Grim's Sleeping Beauty, The Breadwinner, The Secret of Kells, Coda, Give Up Your Old Sins, and Late Afternoon. So that's a huge amount of animation that's been really, really critically successful. But in almost all cases, not particularly financially successful. So I'm coming to an end. So what is Irish cinema again? Coming back to that question, could we say, in fact, that it's an art cinema, rather than commercial cinema, and that even perhaps those genre films are really not proper genre films. They're not as recognizably genre films as Hollywood genre cinema is. And I think on one hand, it's a desire to be different. Irish filmmakers don't want to be Hollywood filmmakers, or if they did, they'd go to Hollywood and be Hollywood filmmakers. And then you have a real tradition of art film being made, and you're probably familiar with the cinema of Lenny Abrahamson, so Adam and Paul, Garage, What Richard Did, Frank, Room, The Little Stranger. And these are all absolutely clearly art films. They're questioning, they're thoughtful, they are set at a different pace to Hollywood cinema. And another set of examples is the documentaries and films of Pat Collins. Some of you may have seen those: Connemara Silence, Song of Granite, Henry Glassy Fieldwork, and so on. So, and I know I've got some more questions to answer, and I haven't forgotten. And one of them was about gender. So let me just find that one. There. Sorry about this. I know that we had a question about, oh yeah, here we are, from Lara. Can you talk a little bit about gender diversity and gender roles? So yes, Lara. One of the challenges for Irish cinema is to diversify the representation of women on screen, and also to include more Irish filmmakers in terms of filmmaking. So there are, as I've put on this PowerPoint here, specific Screen Island initiatives to support work by women filmmakers. So you get extra money if you are a woman filmmaker. You get extra for being a writer, extra for being a director, and double for being a writer-director. But I think it's also still the case, and most women filmmakers would agree, that they are still marginalized, and they tend to get like the soft documentaries about relationships rather than the big budget films. And there's still a big reluctance, and there's not just in Ireland, to give women big budget films to make. And there's also been certainly far more successful male Irish film stars, and the Irish women stars are only plus now coming through. And obviously Saoirse Ronan, and there are a couple more, but there are way more big male Irish names. So they're getting the big roles, they're getting the attention, and there's a long way to go on that. So then I'm just finishing up. So what are the challenges? Competing with Hollywood, always a big question for a small national cinema. Should we even try? But then, of course, for all cinemas, the competition with TV and streaming platforms such as Netflix is huge. And I don't know if it reached you in Brazil, but normal people which is the adaptation of Sally Rooney's book, directed by Lenny Abramson, and made by Element Pictures, was a massive success, just a huge success. And I interviewed Lenny when they made it. He was saying it just gave them the opportunity to make a really, really, really long art house film, and that would reach far, far, far more people if it had been a film. So certainly there is a merging of TV and platforms, but that isn't going to work for everybody. And then, of course, we have the ongoing problem of COVID-19, and you know, what none of us know is, and I think this is one of your questions, Noelia. What you asked, what will be the main themes explored in films and plays after the pandemic? You also asked about genre films, so I think I've talked about that. But I think it's really hard to tell. Nobody can tell whether life will go back to normal after the pandemic, or whether everything will have been fundamentally changed. Certainly, there are very few films being made at the moment. And there will be perhaps more themes. And one of the things about Normal People, it was a film about two people connecting, and I think people really related to that. So it'll be interesting to see how themes of isolation kind of work into film in the post-pandemic period. So I also know that I had a couple of questions that I haven't answered. Thanks, Lara. So also, Lara, you asked, how do you see the representation of immigrants in Irish cinema in the 21st century? Are there any productions related to direct provision? Yeah, there was a TV series related to direct provision. I can't remember its name, but it was okay. It was a kind of a thriller set in the direct provision centre. So yes, but there is a long way to go before immigrants are seen to be anything other than adjuncts to the story. There aren't that many films that have immigrants as the central characters about them, but they're more secondary characters. So I think that is the answer to that. And then Rosalind, probably pronouncing your name wrong. In the chapter Screening Irish America, we state the Irish became white by distinguishing themselves primarily from African Americans in a manner that was systematic, violent, and undemocratic. Can you cite which other people have suffered the same in contemporary American social context? That's just a really huge question. It's a really huge question. I'm not certain that I can give you the answer to that. You may want to answer it yourself. But certainly there is a long history of the Irish being discriminated against in America, but nothing like the way that African Americans were discriminated against. So on the one hand, and now Irish people, they're white, so they have opportunities that Black Americans still don't. And Caitlin asked, in your Northern Ireland chapter, you mentioned the importance of the historical past as a theme to be explored. Is the theme of Irish history also majorly present in other modes of Irish cinema? Well, no, the answer is not very much. Most of the big Irish history films were made by English filmmakers, funnily enough. So, The Magdalen Sisters by a Scottish filmmaker. The Wind That Shakes the Barley was made by Ken Loach. Philomena was made by Stephen Frears. And so, funnily enough, the telling of the big Irish history stories has come from British cinema rather than Irish cinema. And yeah, Black 47 is an exception, and it didn't do well at the box office. It did well locally in Ireland, but it didn't do well globally. So I think that'll put people off. I think they'll stick perhaps more with genre films, which are more recognisable in the global market. Mm-hmm. Have I covered most of the questions earlier?
I think so. I think you have over. Oh, what about Kathleen? Kathleen,
yeah, no, I did answer. I just answered that. That was the most recent one that I just answered. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I have a question for you to finish. Is to be a filmmaker in your wish list?
No, not at all. No, I'm busy enough as I am. Thank you very much. But my book on Hedy Lamarr is being adapted for the screen, and so my book will be turned into film, but I won't make it.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
So I see Manuel says, I love Normal People. Yeah, I don't know how many of the rest of you have seen Normal People, because Normal People is fantastic. It's just a really fantastic TV series, so I really would recommend it. And it's something about, I found that it was a bit warmer than the book. The book is very chilly and very intellectual, and TV with its sort of intimacy brought a warmth to it that the book didn't have. And it's got two fantastic performers at the heart of it as well. It's really, really good.
I'm really impressed with my students because they know more films than me, because they are, young people, they are all the time in the internet searching for films, mainly Irish films, and they come with the new ideas about them. It's interesting. Calvary, I haven't seen it yet, but most of them have already seen. And
yeah, Calvary is a really interesting film. It's a very challenging film. On the one hand, it's very serious, and on the other hand, it's very flippant. And so who's going to direct the adaptation of my book? Well, I can tell you, since everybody knows, that Gal Gadot is the star of it. So Wonder Woman is going to play Hedy Lamarr in it. And it's the showrunner from, she's one of the big showrunners anyway. So it'll be a big production for Amazon Prime. It's a 6-part TV series.
I think Sarah has a question.
That's right. No, I've just answered it.
Okay. So because Sanyo is one of my advisees, he's doing his doctorate on Irish film, mainly horror films, and he is really in tune with everything that happens in terms of Irish film.
Well, good luck, Sanyo.
Thank you. Good luck, Sanyo. He needs good luck because he's planning to go to Ireland before finishing his thesis, and I hope we can go together. Lara also wants to go, so if the vaccine comes, we see together. I'm planning to go to Ireland. Not
we should.
Place,
yeah, I mean.
Pardon?
Yeah, you should. I mean, we've had other visitors from Brazil. One of our former students came across last year, and of course, Ketla is doing with us. She got funded a 2-year postdoc to compare Irish Troubles films with Brazilian favela films.
Ah, very interesting. Okay.
Yeah, interesting topic. Yeah.
So, any question, Lara, from the audience? I think no question.
No questions. Okay. Well, do you want to finish up, or do you want to? Is there anything?
If you have anything to say before I finish.
I don't think so. No, I mean, I did kind of go through, I guess. I mean, there's so much to say, right, about Irish cinema, and then it's really boring listening to somebody talk forever. But yeah, no, I don't think that I have anything. I mean, there's nothing happening at the moment because nobody's making or releasing any films, so things are very quiet. Things are very quiet for us. Yeah.
So, may I conclude by thanking you for coming and joining us this afternoon or this evening in Ireland, because it must be 8 o'clock in Ireland.
It is, yeah. It's dark outside. Yep.
And the audience for being here every Thursday with us, attending different chats on history, on film, on poems. Sonia, I think Sunny say something. Oh,
saying thank you. They're saying thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Thank you.
I know everybody's happy because everybody was expecting you to have these answers, because we have been discussing about Irish films, and they make questions, and I know that they read a lot, but it's better to listen to the authors of the books. And you.
Very good.
When the author comes, when the writer comes, he or she confirms what they have written.
We didn't make it up. Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Okay, Noelle. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of you with your work on Irish cinema.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Hi,
you very
Caitlin. How
much.
are you?
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.